Welcome back to Dummy Boy Finance. I'm Dummy Boy, and in this video, I want to talk about my favorite cannabis play that had extremely great news come out. The stock we're looking at today is HighTide. It announced today the details of its consolidation to meet NASDAQ listing requirements. And so the news we got today is that HighTide is going to conduct a 15-to-1 share split on May 14th. And so what exactly does this 15-to-1 share consolidation mean? It means that whatever the closing price on HighTide is on May 13th, the following day we are going to multiply our share price by 15, and the shares that you're holding, you are going to divide by 15. And so that will become your new position in HighTide. And so for example, on the Canadian dollar today, we closed at 60 cents. We would multiply that 15. That gives us something around $9. And so my share count would be divided by 15. And so that would become my average cost. And so don't get too excited when you see HighTide trading at $9. That doesn't mean that you are rich. It just means that we have done our 15-to-1 split. So everything is still in accordance. Nothing gets changed. Everything is proportional. So you don't lose money and you don't make money. Everything is relative. I am extremely excited about this because now we actually finally got the news of our uplisting. So those of you guys who aren't familiar, HighTide currently trades on the TSX as well as the OTC, and so it is not as accessible to all investors. So some people and some brokerages don't allow for OTC trading, and so they can't get their hands on HighTide. As well, institutional investors don't really like to buy up OTC stocks because there's more risk for them. And so once you have a stock on the NASDAQ, it becomes essentially more verified. It's a lot easier for people to buy in, as well as it's easier for institutional investors and hedge funds to buy up the shares. And so because of this accessibility to buy these shares, it is going to benefit shareholders, and it's essentially going to favor share appreciation. And so you guys know I love companies that are the pioneer in whatever they do. And so this sentence pretty much sums it all up. Today's news represents a significant milestone towards HighTide becoming the first major cannabis retailer anywhere in the world to be listed on the NASDAQ. So this is no joke. You guys know I will take HighTide over Tilray, over Afria, over Aurora, over Canopy, over Planet 13. I love this company. They have a strong foundation because of their real estate presence in Canada. And so those of you guys who aren't familiar with Canadian policies, we here in Canada are extremely big on immigration, which means that over time, there are going to be a lot more people that inhabit Canada. Our population will start to go up, and the value of our real estate will continue to go up because there's going to be higher demand for each piece of real estate. And so if we're looking at HighTide that already has a huge presence in Canada with their real estate all over Canada, they already have a very strong anchor to their business. And we have seen acquisitions recently like Fab CBD, like Grass City, like Smoke Cartel, that basically bolsters their e-commerce segment that will just continue to give them further reach. And so if we look at company specific factors, these guys have made the right acquisitions to strengthen their e-commerce side. They continue to buy more real estate, open more brick and mortar shops, and once federal legalization happens in the United States, they are going to initiate the same strategy and open up brick and mortar shops in America. And so they will have real estate exposure in Canada as well as the United States, and they already have a huge presence on e-commerce. And so now this was the last thing that we needed for HighTide, and that was more exposure, more eyes, more accessibility to this stock. And so now that we are on the NASDAQ, you could see Raj Grover says it best. It's gonna make our shares more accessible to a larger audience of both retail and institutional investors, which will increase the appeal to potential M&A targets. And so at the end of the day, this was very big news coming out of HighTide. I could not be any happier here. And so let's look at the charts to see how we react. On a day where I expected to see HighTide at least be green, we did close flat on the day. And so this is where I need to give out a warning for anybody who is expecting HighTide to blow in the next coming weeks. Since we are listing onto the NASDAQ right now is very overvalued. So it is unfortunate timing that we are uplisting at a time where the NASDAQ continues to sell off. And so my fear is when we get listed onto the NASDAQ, we are going to be associated with the NASDAQ, and so our share price is going to follow the NASDAQ. And if the NASDAQ continues to sell off, HighTide, just by association, will also continue to sell off. And so another reason that kind of gives me that conviction is this gap to the downside at around 30 cents. And so before, I couldn't really see why or how we would get our price to this point. But now that we are going to be on the NASDAQ, which is going to be the hardest hit indice during our correction, it could bring our price action as low as this 32 cents level. And so that would equate to around $4 post stock split. And so that is a lot of downside still left here on HighTide. And so those of you guys who are still looking and trying to figure out whether or not you want to buy HighTide, if you aren't already into it, I'd be personally very patient. I am down on my position on HighTide, but I am happy to hold through this downside. You guys know I'm a huge believer in this company. You guys know exactly why I'm a huge believer in this company. And so if we get down to this point, I will be loading the boat to bring my costs down, and I will be ready to ride for the next decade here with HighTide. Overall, on technical level, we just continue to trade in this pennant, and so we should start to find some support at this point. But don't be surprised at all if we see HighTide dump once it gets listed on the NASDAQ. This gap to fill should be in the back of your head if you are an investor or a potential investor here in HighTide. And so if we just kind of look at the volume on the day, we had extraordinarily high volume. We were up intraday, but we did close flat. So people are starting to sell here. And so don't be surprised at all to see HighTide go lower before it starts to go up. But I wanted to bring this to your attention because this was major news for HighTide, for shareholders of HighTide. And so if you guys enjoyed this video, don't forget to like. We are on the road to 10K subs. So if you made it to this point, feel free to hit that subscription button. This is Dummy Boy Finance. I'm Dummy Boy, and I'll see you guys in the next one.